Hey there, and thanks for listening to the Beyond These Clinic Walls podcast. I'm your host, Julia, a PT turned product professional, joined by my delightful co-hosts, Emma and Emily, founders of the Clinician Transition. Each episode, we interview former rehab professionals who have leveraged their clinical skills into non-traditional roles. I invite you to come hear the journeys, follow the career paths, and learn about the opportunities beyond these clinic walls. On today's episode, we sit down with Dr. Emil Berengut, the Director of Clinical Operations at Kaia Health, a digital health company. Dr. Berengut has received his master's in social work from the University of Maryland, a doctorate of physical therapy from NYU, and a master's in health administration at the NYU Wagner School of Public Service. Following his doctorate, he was the first graduate of the orthopedic physical therapy residency program at the Hospital for Special Surgery. He is a board-certified physical therapist and adjunct lecturer at the NYU Program of Physical Therapy, and has presented at the Combined Sections meeting of the APTA, at the American Congress of Rehabilitation Medicine, and the MSKCC Rehabilitation Symposium. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did talking with Dr. Berengut. We'd quickly like to note that the views, thoughts, and opinions shared by Dr. Berengut are a reflection of his beliefs and do not represent those of his employer or their affiliates. Happy listening! This is exciting. Emil, thank you for being here with us today on Beyond These Clinic Walls. I'm so excited to have you as a guest.
Of course, my pleasure, and thank you very much for reaching out. I'm really happy to chat with you.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you here. My first tip-off question is just when I kind of ask all of our guests is to just walk us through a little high-level overview of your experience. You have worn many hats in your career, and I think you have more letters in your last name than I do, and that's saying something because I have a crazy Polish last name. You have a ton of certifications and qualifications. So can you just walk us through high-level kind of your experience?
Sure. Started in healthcare in 94, actually working at a PT clinic as an aide. Then moved into working in chronic mental illness treatment in Baltimore, Maryland. Moved on to working for an employee assistance program in Washington, D.C. Went to PT school, finished my residency, worked in orthopedics, cancer rehab, orthopedics again, and sports, and been in tech for the last 2 years. I've been at Kaia since the fall of last year.
So you've definitely worn a ton of hats through each of those steps. Can you tell us a little bit then about maybe some of the transitions? So you started in social work and psychology, is that right?
Yeah, so I started in mental health treatment before I actually became a social worker. So my first job was working at a psychiatric hospital, and then right after that, I worked in addictions for quite a few years.
Wow. Okay. So how did that kind of prepare you to then move into physical therapy in a different clinical setting?
Well, once a social worker, always social worker. Arguably, there was a moment when I realized that a lot more of my practice is informed by my training in social work than it is by traditional biomechanical based physical therapy. And it was an epiphany I had. I didn't know it right away. It actually took me some time to realize this. But once I did, it was like a liberating experience, and I really felt that connection between all of the different training that I've had.
Did you have any like one particular event or incident that really made that epiphany happen?
Yes, it was a series of events, and I think of it as the cookies story. So I was working at an outpatient PT clinic at a like an orthopedic hospital in the city, and I believe I was in residency, and I was like, I'm this Mr. Ortho residency, big learning all of these fancy techniques and reading tons of research. And then I was working with a lot of PTs in the clinic who've had many years of experience on me. And they were getting like cookies or baked like brownies like every week. And I was getting nothing, like not candy, just nothing. And I was like in my head thinking like, do you know how much research I read to deliver this like a 100% evidence-based treatment, and no one can even bake me like a single baked good. And then I started to listen, and what I realized was the patients loved the therapist, and the therapists were delivering phenomenal care by simply listening, paying attention to what they were saying, and making sure that the intervention matches or what the person is able to do at the moment, or in social work, it's called meeting the person where they're at.
Yeah, that's like a huge skill that we've learned in PT school, but it's something you can't even really learn. The motivational interviewing kind of technique, being able to really have that active listening and connect with the patient exactly as you said, where they're at. And it's something I remember in PT school, we had to do like a mock motivational interview, and we had an actor come in, and it was the most harsh experience that I've ever had to work through. But as you're in the clinic and you're finally working with that, coming to that realization and that experience on your own, I think it's really good, and it makes it huge. So when did you get cookies? Did you get brownies? What was that first baked good that you got?
Yes, eventually there were some baked goods involved. I preface this by saying I delivered care not for baked goods, but it does feel great to be acknowledged that way. And in a way, if you think about it, it's if someone takes the time to, maybe they're having pain or whatever, just to share something so personal with you, something they bake. I even remember what it was. It was the first thing I ever got. It was banana bread, and I still have the recipe that the patient gave me. It was literally the best banana bread I've ever had in my entire life. But for someone to be so kind and appreciate so much what you help them with, it just means so much to me, and it really kind of helps you every day get up for work.
I totally agree with that. I love banana bread too. So if any of our listeners out there, if this connects with you, you can send some banana bread my way in Boston. So social work definitely, and that psychology really connected with you with working in a PT clinic. Now, I've heard some of your other talks, and one of the other motivations that you brought up with wanting to move into physical therapy was having this career with objective measures. Did you feel like PT met that need for you as a career?
Yes and no. Yes, because they're clearly much more objective measures in physical medicine,
Mm-hmm.
physical therapy. No, because more often than not, they don't really mean much.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the simplest example would be, as we often do, we may share with a patient your shoulder flexion is up from 60 degrees to 90s. And they're like, well, so what? Like, what does
Right.
that even mean? If you frame it in human terms and you say, well, before we started, you couldn't put your sweater on, but now it looks like you can, or maybe you couldn't comb your hair. That sounds a lot better, and it is objective in a way, but it's a lot less quantitative. It's a lot more
Right.
qualitative. And so the qualitative piece is probably the one that I've learned to, I've essentially come back to my roots to
Mm-hmm.
appreciate. In part because, so my wife is an academic, she's an anthropologist, and their like qualitative research is like their
Yeah.
bread and butter. And so through chatting with her and understanding, again, coming out of residency, being like, oh, like this is the probability, the LR, and like no one but us really cares about that. And then understanding that behind all these numbers, they're like people with like real stories and people who are struggling every day. And they're not just numbers, whether it's their range of motion or their life or how many steps they have
Yeah.
to enter. But having said that, it is great to have some ability to reflect on progress, even if it is just to a reflection for you as a therapist to think like, oh, I am making a difference, and let me just help to tie it to like a function.
For sure. I would argue, just based off of kind of this brief chat that we've had so far with you talking, is that your career kind of sounds like this polarity between qualitative and quantitative measures, where you kind of have that qualitative pull from social work and psychology, and then moving into PT, maybe a little bit more tech now, you're assessing with that quantitative measurement and kind of coming to that happy medium to find maybe your happy zone of where you want to grow and be professionally.
Yeah, that's the interesting. I haven't thought about it like that. I will say that in tech, measuring impact qualitatively is I mean, it's so elusive and it's so
Yeah.
difficult. It's so hard to measure the why.
Yes.
It's much easier to measure the what or the how much or the how
Mm-hmm.
many. Probably just thinking about it now in a broader sense of things, that is the one of the biggest things that troubles sort of tech companies, particularly tech companies that work with people with like that are user facing or delivering something to people, is understanding the why and somehow figuring out a way to engineer around that, because that's what's so
For
difficult.
sure. I totally agree. A theme that I see in the tech realm, especially as healthcare is moving into that tech realm, is that you have these three components. So you have this want to standardize care, but then allow providers to remain autonomous of the care at the same time customizing a plan for a patient. When a company can find that middle zone between those three, I think that's really where there's an avenue for success. But it's very challenging to do. And I think, finding the why behind that is where that success is going to be.
Yeah. So someone smarter than me said to me once, they said, "Oh, it seems like physical therapy is a Bayes experiment with an N of one." And I was
Ooh,
like, "Holy smokes, that's what it is. That's where the cookies come
yeah.
from." Because when you, even though it seems like you're founding your practice on a lot
Mm-hmm.
of evidence, at the end of the day, it's really what's just helping to inform your sort of reasoning, and what you're delivering is actually, in your best experience, is customized to the person in front of you.
Yeah.
And that is, I think that's an ever elusive sort of target for, I would say, any modality that is contingent on like
Mm-hmm.
relationships, right? So in tech, I mean, I can imagine, I'm not a dermatologist, what do I know, right? But like, I imagine if, let's say, AI scans like a mole, probably needs some clinical information, but you probably make a pretty good determination of what that is. Or I've heard like radiology is like huge with AI kind of moving
Right.
into that, right? I imagine fairly easy to kind of quantify, but how do you quantify like I'm sure all of us have gotten like, what do I do for my knee? What
Yeah.
do you mean?
Oh, yeah.
Right? But it's like, it's
Yep.
your knee. Tell me about
Yeah.
your knee, and we'll come up with something for you. There's no like me
Yep.
things, it's you
Yeah.
things.
It's like the
Um,
dietitian when they ask them, what food should I eat? Or like, where should I do it? And you're like, all of them, but in a specific way tailored to you with all this evidence to support a custom diet. There's never a short answer to that at all.
I was just gonna say too, it's kind of what, just adding to your both of your points, it's what makes physical therapy so wonderful and so beautiful and why we all like it and we can create relationships with people because you can treat someone in almost an infinite number of ways, just depending on what their needs are and what their goals are. But then it makes it really hard to standardize. And it's just that, again, just that push pull.
Totally, kind of like Emil said, he created the best evidence based care plans. And unless a patient touches it, it's going to go out the window. It's not going to be beneficial at all. That's a place that we're trending into, and that's going to be a huge hurdle in the tech industry is behavioral change, because so much of PT is rescoping the perception of our patients to usually do an exercise that they don't want to or have it fit into their daily life where they've already become so accustomed to not do that. Have you seen any trends, Emil, with behavioral change, maybe with your current company or in the tech industry as a whole?
well, I will say that for certainly for us, affecting behavior is probably in our DNA more so probably than anything else. We understand that in order to be successful and to do what you described, which is get folks to move a certain way or whatever, you really have to understand their motivation. You have to understand what stage of change they're in, what they're ready to do, and without that, we're just YouTube, right? So I think that's key. It's a little tough, to speak for sort of other companies. I don't know how far along they are, or I think our sort of kind of claim to fame, we've always been, digital first and making sure the right care gets to the right person at the right time. So for us, I would say it has to be at the top of our priorities, and that is what we spend a significant amount of time talking about and ideating and collecting feedback from users around.
I was going to say I feel like we've been talking a lot about behavioral change of the patients. What I'm kind of interested in is behavioral change within our industry. So in our past two episodes, we've talked about this traditional, non-traditional, traditional, and fully non-traditional. And I kind of think of your company in that middle ground of the non-traditional, traditional, and then the people who have been in the traditional world, what we think of as your the PT brick and mortar clinic. I kind of wonder if maybe there's some fear and can we have space for both, and kind of what do you think about that kind of for our industry changing with this push and pull that we've also been talking about of the tech versus the more what we're used to.
Well, let's look at it this way. So agree. I mean, I let's call it what it is, right? It is fear, right? And this is not PT. That's not PT. This is not this. This is not that. But I want to look at it from just like a population health perspective. So there's quite a bit of research out there that shows that less than 10% of people with MSK actually go to a physical therapist. I mean, the one paper off the top of my head, just randomly, I just looked at it. It's from 2007 from PT Journal. 18,000 people with musculoskeletal pain, something like, I don't know, 7.8% went to a physical therapist. There's that. And then there's the piece of there's not enough PTs for 350 million people or for, let's say, half of that population. It's just impossible. The numbers just don't add up. So yes, we can think about what is this technology or whatever is the case is taken away from us as a profession. Or we can turn it around and think about what is it adding to the people who are trying to get healthcare and cannot. I think about working at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, people in New York City, right, largest metropolitan area. There's like 20,000 PTs in New York State, or I don't remember, 20,000 NYPTM members, whatever. There's thousands of PTs here. Having patients get up at 6 a.m., patients who are going through chemo, get up at 6 a.m., travel, wait for an accessoride in the freezing cold, travel for 2 hours in accessoride to get to the city. We were in Midtown. Get there with their heart rate in the 150s, and then me measuring their blood pressure and heart rate and giving them water to drink for 30 minutes. We're exercising for 15, and then they've got a 2-hour ride back on accessory. That is not fair. That's not fair to them. I could say this is great. We've got a 3 months waiting list. Phenomenal for the clinic. Not so great for the patient. So instead, let's think about who needs in-person PT or even virtual PT, who needs good quality information with a quickly growing technology with which virtually every field of medicine is embracing, so that we can get care to everybody. No one is losing their jobs. These clinics are still very much open. They still have very much those waiting lists. There's tons of people who are not going to consider virtual. They're not going to consider an app. They will go to the physical therapist. There's nothing that an app can offer to that individual when they're coming to you. But let's talk about the 90+% of people who are not going to us to physical therapy. What can we do as a profession to make sure that those people are getting the help that they need, whether it's chronic pain, whether it's the 15 million people who are cancer survivors who have not gotten rehabilitation because none is available in most of the country? Is it folks in geographically isolated rural areas who have to travel 3 hours to get to a clinic? Is it people in urban areas where there are no PT clinics nearby? Or I have a friend who works at a hospital in the Bronx. They see 1,000 strokes per year. The wait list for rehab, and with stroke, right? Timing is of the essence. Waiting for 3 months to get access to a clinic. That doesn't seem fair to me, right? That's not, I don't know I kind of struggle to understand like the fear, because nobody's losing, everybody is winning here. So that's what I would love to kind of promote, is in not a net zero kind of a zero sum kind of approach, but think about it as everybody is getting better access to care, better access to better quality of life. It's a profession that is going to shine. And like what Emily said earlier, we can deliver the right care to the right people at the right time.
That's great. So to summarize, that was really beautifully said. But I think to summarize, you're expanding, not replacing, and there's room for everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But good summary. Thank you, because I do ramble. So what I would love for our profession is to become as proactive as other colleagues, particularly as physicians and advanced practice nurses and PAs are, and take a bigger role in sort of in the population health sense. So I would love for us to get out of this reactive stance, locked into our clinics. We're not that. We have a unique set of knowledge, extensive education, tons of training. We know how to talk to people. We are experts in multiple systems, not just NICS or, we understand how to work with people holistically. We understand how to consume research. I would love for us to get out and be out there getting to people before their pain progresses to persistent pain, before their problems escalate, before they need to have surgeries. We are optimally positioned to do all of these things. If you think about from public health perspective, like physical activity is probably the one of the biggest bang for the bucks you can get in terms of an intervention, right? Maybe like vaccination and public and physical activity, right? Who is better trained to get people to do physical activity? Name a profession that exists that can get people to move, do it like safely, productively, efficiently, and functionally, other than PTs. I can't think of anyone. So I would love for there to be a way for us to not be sort of this like, administer treatment, submit claim, get paid. Can we find a way to get out of that scenario?
I think that is a big frustration too of probably every PT in the clinic. Like, we see people after, they've had all these different things and they've had pain for 20 years and they've Googled 18 different things. So I guess my follow-up question is, do you have like ideas of ways we can position ourselves to be more frontline, more direct access, that first person that people come to?
So I would say broadly, first and foremost, is get much better at research and disseminating our research. If you think about it, most PhDs who do research that is relevant to us don't have a PhD in physical therapy. So physical therapy is just becoming an actual science, right? I know like NYU has a program in physical, a PhD program physical, but most everyone else are rehab sciences, neurosciences, whatever else. So we got to get better at that. That's number one. Because when it comes to demonstrating our value population wide level, we have to show like this is our research that was made by PTs, right? So if you think about those papers, let's say that Julie Fritz puts out that get into Spine Journal or JAMA, all of our papers should be like that. Going back to NYU, able to step outside of the clinic, as your podcast is called, Beyond These Clinic Walls, and offer folks assistance before they even get hurt. Super effective. We were able to function in like a public health capacity. We worked with folks who are at risk for other conditions because of low physical activity. We worked with high risk populations who were more likely to get injured, like dancers. So those are some concrete examples of what can be done. I mean, everybody has to come up with their own, kind of applications, but it's doable.
I just love that because, you had one example that was more global, but then another one where it was like, no, you can go out and do this stuff. Like you can be the change and do a lot of this if this is part of your frustration in the clinic.
Yeah, it's just social work 101. It's systems thinking.
Are you able to do any of those things at your current role at Kaia? Are you working towards that?
At Kaia, because we're a digital first product, we can potentially reach basically, and that's my like goal, And I think that goal is shared by everyone at the company, is essentially be able to provide care to anyone, anywhere, with access to a device, any sort of a device. And I just think about probably close to 15 to 20 million people who might end up with long COVID, and the best way to deliver care to them, best way to deliver care to underserved communities where you may not be able to walk to a PT clinic, but as long as you have a device, we should be able to help you in some way.
I wanted to bring up something Emily articulated so well in one of our previous episodes. Goes back to PTs getting out of the clinic and taking seats at different tables. Aside from population health and research, where do you see PTs being able to extend their skills to make a difference for the profession?
Interesting. So that question comes up to me a lot when I chat with other folks who wanted to get in technology. I think about us having expert level training in multiple systems, like physiologic systems. I think about us being experts in things like regulatory compliance, us being experts in healthcare system in general and knowing it to an intricate level of detail, and understanding how interdisciplinary care works and how to be a part of a team. So all of those things, I think, are pluses that we bring to the broader world. I don't think many people know about it.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people know about us. I think there's a lot of education of the general public that we need to do for sure. I think that's one of the things we need to break down before we can really extend our reach. I'd love to hear, Emil, if you could talk a little bit about Kaia, maybe your elevator pitch of Kaia. You've talked a little bit about the mission of giving everyone healthcare accessibly, but talk about the mission a little bit and then maybe your role as operations to the extent that you're comfortable.
Sure. So, in brief, Kaia's goal is to democratize access to care.
How would you describe Kaia Health to my mom? And she is not tech savvy, but she's a wonderful woman.
Yeah. So Kaia Health is an app that will help you move better. And we believe in leveraging technology and human intelligence, human experience to deliver the right amount of care to at the right time, regardless of where somebody might be located or their background, their physical ability. That's in brief what we do. My job is I'm a director of clinical operations. And one way to think about it is I lead the team of clinicians. I lead a team of clinicians who function as clinicians at Kaia, meaning there are other folks with clinical background, lots of other people with clinical background, but they may be doing research or they might be doing another kind of area. But the folks that I work with, and it's an interdisciplinary team, we are the largest concentration of clinical expertise at Kaia.
I was going to ask if you could elaborate on being operations and clinical operations. We've talked a little bit about product and customer success and a little bit of sales. Operations, I feel like in Boston, if anyone's familiar with the geography there, it's kind of like the Brighton of Boston. Like everyone knows it's there, but no one really knows where it starts and ends. So can you tell us a little bit more about the operations role and just some qualities that kind of make that a good fit for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's like where no one knows where it stops or ends. That's a good description. One of my bosses basically framed it as we're the glue that holds everything together. And I think that's a really good description. I think the positive is that we get to contribute in multiple different work streams, probably in every single work stream. Probably the tougher part is sometimes we are in more of a reactive posture because somebody has an idea and our job is to execute it. So in terms of what attracts me is that I get to try to help in multiple different ways. But I want to stress, like, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is I don't want there to be any more people taking 2-hour accessorize each way. That's like literally my goal. That's what I think about all the time. And being at Kaia, I feel like this is the closest, despite being in healthcare for like since 1994, this is the closest I've ever felt to it's almost within grasp that there I can visualize a future, I can see it where no one has to struggle with getting access to care. And it's our like space, like the kind of MSK physical impairment space, right? If you think about a larger picture, and we ought to, as the clinicians that we are, is think about like COVID, right? And think about access to care during COVID. And just think about like anybody who was in New York, obviously, everybody probably across the country saw lines of people standing outside who could not get care, or people dying at home because they couldn't even, no one would come to them. So that's not okay. We're like sending people, I don't know, to like different planets. Like it doesn't even make sense. And then when they get there, like the treatment eventually is like relatively straightforward. It's just getting the care, getting someone to help you. So for me, the MSK piece of that, or the kind of chronic persistent pain piece of that, or physical impairment, is I just want someone to have access to some degree of qualified evidence-based care where they feel heard and they feel understood.
Then I saw, Emil, recently, I'm not sure if this is still the case, but at one point you were hiring for a therapist. And I was curious, if you had your perfect therapist hire, what would that look like? What's a therapist that would thrive in this sort of role versus maybe not?
So first and foremost, they must be mission driven. And I don't mean that as a cliche, but the person who like goes to sleep and wakes up thinking about how to help people and do it better is a person who's going to be amazing here. Second, someone who is agile. You must be able to pivot quickly on the spot. That's not just Kaia, that's probably every tech startup. And three, you must feel comfortable wearing multiple hats. At the end of the day, you must be a phenomenal clinician. And I don't just mean a great diagnostician, but I also mean a phenomenal clinician who's able to talk and understand, whether you're talking to them as a patient, whether you're understanding and you're speaking, you're their voice for our colleagues who are not clinicians, and you understand what they're struggling with or they might be struggling with, and really have that granular level of what someone is going through when they are experiencing physical impairment or disability.
And when you say agile, do you mean that that person may have the opportunity to contribute beyond direct patient care? Are there other projects that they would potentially be able to take on?
Yes. Yep. So I would say for the agile piece is just being able to quickly pivot from one sort of direction into another. The multiple hats, yes. So there's always an opportunity to contribute on different levels. One of my goals when I started here was, instead of us or any clinician being seen in a narrow SME role, but really be involved in every part of the company, be it product development and all parts of the product lifecycle, or sales, or partnerships, whatever the case, client success. We have a lot to offer, and it's really important that there's a clinician voice. And for me, it's also the voice of the patient that is being heard at all different levels of the company. It makes for a better company. It makes for better outcomes, a better experience for the folks that we work with. And frankly, I find that PTs thrive in that kind of environment. What I wanna say to you all, well, first of all, kudos for like pushing the field forward. That's number one. And number two, I believe, and I think you all do, in a brighter future, and I think that's what's really important. But I would love to kind of hear your thoughts, because you get to talk to lots more people than I talk to. What are you all hearing from other PTs, or maybe other OTs, or whatever other folks in sort of the rehab space? And how do you understand the evolution of technology? And what can I be doing to uh, push the field forward?
Well, I think a theme that I can relate to that you brought up was fear. Because, as we kind of push forward, something that Emma and I and Julia also are very passionate about is pushing the field forward in terms of opening our eyes to non-traditional roles. And I think a lot of times the profession, especially at first, was scared of that, like, oh no, we're going to run out of PTs to do things. And as it relates to your mission, I think you just stated it beautifully. I don't know if I would even add anything that like there's really nothing to fear because the digital movement can add and it can get that other crazy 90 some percent of people who are not getting any physical therapy at all or education at all or they're not being triaged at all. And so I think there is a huge window of opportunity there to actually help our population and to get people to in person when they really do need it. And then if they really do need a human, that's great. Then we can do our thing. My point was just really to, I guess, summarize and reinforce your earlier point. We don't need to fear. It's not a net zero, as you put it. We can add to each other.
I could add to that. We kind of talked a little bit about the why aren't we more preventative as a profession? I think we could look inward on that as well. I think a lot of the people we talk to, not everyone, but some of this feeling of wanting to go, I just want a non-clinical job. I just want to get out of this. I think to some degree that could be prevented. So I'm very passionate about what I do professionally. I think that alleviates some of the feelings that lead people to feel that. And I think what you're doing too, Emil, is a great option for people who want to try something different, more modern, but still be patient facing. I think that's just such a nice way to do it. To your point, very mission driven. I think anyone who is interested in something non traditional, you really have to believe in the mission, just like you believed in a PTOT speech education when you went through it. So, and you also mentioned we've kind of joked in previous episodes that we can't solve the fundamental, systemic healthcare issues, but I really appreciate you going through and giving us some really actionable ways where it doesn't feel like it's so impossible and out of reach.
Oh, absolutely. I can tell you, one of my favorite parts about recruiting is I get to talk to so many smart people. And I'm like, I just wish I had the budget to hire like everybody I talk to because they're just such cool people with such amazing backgrounds and experiences. And I just kind of geek out over just talking to fellow PTs. To your point, I do feel sometimes like all of us, we have like a collective low professional self esteem, right? We've kind of been isolated and siloed into these kind of places. And I think, right? And it's like a big part of why people are burning out at such high rates. And what you said, Emma, right? You're like, you're still using, no one could do your job, right? No one could do it as good as you do because like I've literally spoken with you about this. Like, what we as a profession need, you still get to use your knowledge, but you get to apply it in a different. And I really just want to encourage people to think whether you're patient facing, whether you're other provider facing or other like non-provider facing, engineer facing, just kind of step outside of those bounds. People ask me all the time, like, oh, how did you end up at Kaia? And I'm like, I basically been thinking and like complaining for all these years about patients not getting access to good care. And I was like, all right, I got an opportunity. So I just did something, right? Is that a pathway for everybody? Heck no. Like, do people need to get a gajillion degrees? No, I just can't decide what I want to do with my life. So that's not a realistic roadmap. Please don't do that unless you really want. But should you take chances and should you talk to people? And I would encourage people, don't, I love talking to PTs. I would say make yourself not talk to PTs. Like talk to one PT, five non-healthcare people for every one or 10. It's such a learning experience to talk to people who don't know what we do, who don't know anything about healthcare, and they talk to you, you're like, oh my God, I've had all of these questions for years, and you finally answered them, and I didn't know who to talk to. So make that like like a goal. Like, I'm going to talk to 10 non-clinical people. Another thing that I found superbly beneficial is to do user interviews or user discovery, not as a therapist. You talk to people as a just like a person and not a clinician. They tell you the most interesting, wildest things you will ever hear. Because when you're in that relationship and you have like your appointments lined up, like, and you're like, oh, how long, what makes your pain better, what makes your pain worse, right? You set up that relationship completely different. But find a way to talk to people in pain. Don't even tell them you're a PT. Just talk to friends, people at the gym. Just find out what they're going through. Find out what works for them, what doesn't. You would be very, very surprised, and you will understand why it's uh, only 10% of people go to us for help.
My take on kind of that big question that you asked, I think goes back to my initial vision for what I wanted this podcast to be. And I titled it Beyond These Clinic Walls. Sounds so cliche, but it really at first was directed towards people taking those non-traditional roles. However, in our discussion here, we brought up a few other avenues that had otherwise been kind of closed-minded to, where you were just saying physically getting therapists out of the clinic and into the population health and just into different ways of interacting and being preventative care. And that was something that I had, been a little, I think we're very siloed at times. And so breaking out and having this cross functional, connection and communication with all different roles is going to really extend how we continue the profession. I think a lot of it is taking those seats at different tables and then you being in a position of this senior leadership where you have this background in PT and this kind of role of power where you can uplift other PTs. You're in a spot to recognize exactly what we know and give us a shot at those different roles and growing in companies or just kind of paving the way. So I think if you keep doing that and giving PTs a shot, that's going to be one way that we keep pushing the profession. I wanted to tack on another thing. Sorry, I ended up talking a lot, but Emma brought up a great point, and then we will wrap up. But Emma, you said we're kind of getting to the point of being burned, and that's when we leave the clinic. And I hope our profession can get to a point where we don't have to feel burned or like any remorse towards PT to move away from it and still be passionate about it. But to an extent, I think it fires the motivation and passion to want to make a difference. Emil, you just mentioned that you're like, I was complaining and I needed a solution and I saw an opportunity and I made the solution, And I think we get that experience while we're in the clinic, but I hope it doesn't come to a point where people are completely burnt to have to make a decision to move out.
Yeah, it's terrible, right? You have so many bright people who genuinely want to help people who, I mean, let's face it though, like some of this is structural, right? Some of this is built in, and as individuals, it's very hard to necessarily change it, right? There is the cost of our education. There is like every PT out there's got like two jobs, right? Why? That's not normal. That's not like a good thing. Is most of us can't afford to pay our school loans back, right? There's that. There is all the pressure and the competition from other professions that are constantly pushing us to, you can't do this, you can't do that. We tell you when you can do this. We tell you when you can do that. There's that too. And I want to like also kind of, I hope that folks out there who run clinics, who maybe own clinics or are directors of rehab or whatever is the case, um, you know, I want you to think about other ways of leveraging the folks who are working with you to give them the opportunity and the exposure, even if it's within your hospital, within another clinic or another practice. Let them talk to other people. Let them give them some time. I know it's expensive. I know. I've done budgets. I know what that's like. I get it. But another way to think about it is we can also just have the turnover and have folks stay with us for a year and then constantly be hiring new people into the mix. I don't want us to be the profession that like eats our young. I don't want us to be like all these other healthcare professions where they're like, what's that? Every fifth physician is retiring. Every, I don't know, sixth nurse is retiring or something like that. I think we have an opportunity to do better, and I hope we all collectively can do something about it. I'm so grateful to you all. I can't tell you how jazzed I am to speak to you all. Please keep doing this. I'm grateful that you all are doing this. This kind of makes my job so much easier, and I get to look forward to talking to smart people. And to me, this just adds to the profession, and whatever's adding to the profession adds to the people we take care of.
Well, Emil, it's been a pleasure having you on here, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emil. It was great seeing you. Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Beyond These Clinic Walls podcast. We really appreciate your support. As always, be sure to follow us on social media, both at LinkedIn and on Instagram, for all the latest updates and episode releases. Questions, comments, concerns, or do you know someone who might make an excellent guest on our next show? Reach out to us at beyondtheseclinicwalls@gmail.com. And thank you for listening.